Hello and welcome to today's live stream. My name's Ryan Pauper, and welcome to Pauper Commander Primers, the series where I'm going to break down powerful commanders in the Pauper Commander format. So, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining me this evening. Um, we're going to be doing a bit of a presentation uh, talking about the commander itself, and this content is meant to be evergreen, for one thing. So, we're going to be going at a high level over the particular commander that we have chosen for tonight, young TOR WAUKI. And then within that context of a high level overview, we'll talk about some of the things that are appealing about the commander, some of the vulnerabilities, some of the play patterns, and kind of go from there. And people who are in chat can ask their questions, and perhaps those questions are relevant to the things you might want to ask later on when you watch and view this yourself. So let's get started. So the commander that we're focusing on today for this primer is close to my heart. It was a commander that when it was released, I immediately thought, man, super, super exciting. But there's some build around that we have to do with it. So young TOR WAUKI, also known as TOR WAUKI the Younger, is a 5-mana Rakdos commander. It's a 3/3. It's got reach and lifelink as keywords. And then it amplifies non-combat sources of damage by 1 to permanents and players. And then it has a cast trigger for instants and sorceries to do 2 damage to any target. So this is the commander we're going to be looking at today. To go through some of the characteristics of it and dive into what those characteristics mean for this particular commander, we're going to be first looking at the cast trigger. And this is really the thing that brought me to TOR WAUKI in the first place, which is that whenever you cast an instant or a sorcery spell, you're going to deal 2 damage to any target. And this essentially means that any of the spells that we play are instantly converted to either removal or they're converted into some form of pressure on our opponent's life total. Um, this means that our draw spells form as removal. It means that anything that's an instance or sorcery is going to generate a source of removal. And this creates a powerful context for a control commander. And that's what we're going to be focusing on. TOR WAUKI is at its finest as a control commander. The second thing is the life gain. And now lifelink we generally think about as being something that we're going to be doing in combat. But the fact is that that lifelink is actually attached to the damage that TOR does whenever TOR pings anything. So whenever we cast an instant or a sorcery, we're going to get 2 damage that we can point to anything on the battlefield, and that's going to have attached to it lifelink, regardless of whether TOR is still on the battlefield when that trigger resolves. It's much like Death Touch, in fact, which is another thing to be paying attention with this commander, is that Death Touch and Lifelink are both going to be attached to the damage itself, meaning that TOR does not need to be there anymore for that to still work, which means that if somebody goes to kill our TOR and we can respond with a flurry of spells, we will gain life for all those 2 damage triggers, which is incredibly powerful. The spell that 2 damage, gain 2 life is called Sorin's Thirst, instant speed, 2 black, or maybe it's a black and a colorless, to deal 2 damage to anything and gain 2 life. So all of our spells have that attached to them. The next thing is that TOR amplifies all of our non-combat damage. And this is incredibly powerful in the context of anything that pings. This doesn't need to be a creature, so it could be an enchantment, it could be an artifact, it could be anything that's dealing damage is going to amplify it by 1. Now, it's important to keep in mind that this 1 damage amplification does not stick around if TOR is gone. So if we go to cast a spell that is dealing 1 damage to everything and TOR dies, it's only going to deal 1 damage to everything instead of 2. So an important thing to keep in mind. But this does take us down the road of things that ping. So Firebrand Archer, maybe like a Reckless Fireweaver, Impact Tremors, Raid Bombardment are good examples of this. These aren't spells that we're going to play in this deck, but they're examples of things you could play. The next thing, and I think this is really core, is that this is a Rakdos control deck. And if this creature did not have that lifelink on it, it would be very difficult to be a control deck if we had no way to recover our life total. Another analogous sort of archetypical deck would be Witherbloom Commander, where we every time we cast an instant or a sorcery, we're going to deal 1 damage to, or we're going to drain everybody for 1 with that Magecraft trigger. And so that's one of the ways that Witherbloom is able to stay afloat, is that even though it's casting Sign and Blood, Night's Whisper, Read the Bones, maybe Shadow Prophecy, these spells, they cost us life. And in a control deck, we really don't have life to freely give, in particular when we come under pressure from aggressive decks. So where TOR WAUKI really shines is in that we recover all of that damage that we take. So when we cast a Lightning Bolt, we're going to gain 2. When we cast a Sign in Blood, we're going to gain 2. So all of our draw spells basically come free of life, and then everything else comes with life, which is really powerful. Many times you'll find yourself playing TOR WAUKI and sitting well above your starting life total, as everybody else is going down, 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 down. And this is a fantastic starting point for a control deck. Rakdos is important in that sense because so many of these black spells do cost us life. A good example would be something like Snuff Out, costs us 4 life. In this deck, it's 4 life, destroy target non-black creature, can't be regenerated, and then we gain 2 life and then deal 2 to something else. So this spell, or this commander, essentially taking these free spells and these ones that cost us life and helping not only generate more value, but also trying to mitigate that life loss is really, really important. Rakdos is also some of the best colors for control. Rakdos and Dimir are amazing control colors. And so we're getting access to Thunderclap, Snuff Out, Spinning Darkness, Defile, Lightning Bolt, Galvanic Blast. Some of those powerful removal spells in the format are all available to us, including the classics like Victim of Night, Grasp of Darkness, things of that nature. Really efficient, cheap stuff. So Rakdos is really just perfect for this commander. Now, there's a couple of things that we have to note when we're talking about this commander that are crucial to the overall picture, and that is that TOR WAUKI is expensive. It's a 5-mana commander, and this is one of the things that I think initially leaned me away from it, and then I started to kind of float back into appreciating just how powerful it was to resolve this, and then begin to control the board. But 5 mana is a lot. So what this is going to do to our design heuristics is it's going to encourage us to have a lot of mana and a lot of just a lot of ways to cast and recast, or cast TOR and then protect TOR. So there's going to have to be a fair bit of ramp. The other thing is that TOR WAUKI is only a 3/3, which means it is vulnerable to most of the damage sources out there. Lightning Bolt, Galvanic Blast when you have Metalcraft on, Frostbite, Fiery Impulse, even like Pestilence and Crypt Rats are going to be tough for TOR WAUKI because he'll die. So we also, because it's an expensive commander that we need to ramp into, so we're dedicating slots in our deck to ramp, we also need to dedicate slots to protection because TOR WAUKI is a very important centerpiece of our plan. So with all that said, let's take a look at the list that I play, and we can talk about all the cards in there. Now, I do want to mention, and I forgot to mention this at the beginning, that this primer is not meant to be prescriptive. It is not meant to tell you exactly what to play. One, because there's some of you out there who are going to come up with better versions of this deck. Maybe you have specific card choices for your meta, but also because cards are going to change over time. So this is more talking about the structural 10,000 foot level of TOR WAUKI and the way that I have it built here with this control build. So let's take a look at the deck and go through some of the card choices. Going over to the deck tech here. So here's the list. The list is in the video description below. And some of the design heuristics that we're going to look at here are going to be are going to tell us kind of what cards are going to be really appealing to us in TOR WAUKI. And one of the things that really immediately comes to mind is that when we resolve TOR WAUKI, we want the ability to not only protect TOR WAUKI, but also to cast spells right away so that we can get use out of TOR WAUKI's ability right away. And so mana efficiency is really important. We want to be focusing on cheaper spells when possible, that allow us to cast more spells in one turn. A spell that costs 5 mana versus a spell that costs 1 mana still triggers TOR WAUKI once. And so we want to be focusing on having efficient spells. Now, the second thing that comes along with that is ideally those spells are instant speed. They don't all need to be instant speed, because sometimes it's okay if we cast sorcery speed spells on our turn, just to do the things that we want to accomplish in the deck. But instant speed is also a really important part of this commander. So you'll see that most of it is going to be instance. 30 of the 100 cards in the deck are instant speed spells, while half of that are sorcery. Now, the next thing is perhaps one of the more interesting parts of TOR WAUKI, and that is modality. If you look at Witherbloom Apprentice, and I'll probably include that link in the description below as well, you'll see that there's a lot of technology in the deck that allows us to adapt to different circumstances. And the beauty of TOR WAUKI is that many of these modal spells that have more than one effect on them, play really, really well with what TOR WAUKI is trying to do. So let's talk about the first one, and we're going to talk about big, broad categories, and that is token makers. Now, the technology of playing instant and sorcery speed token makers was not mine originally. Clay, my co-host here at the Common Connoisseurs and the Tryhards, one day brought TOR WAUKI with all of these token makers, and it occurred to me just how genius this was. These token makers do so much in this format to ensure that we stay alive by having blockers on the ground. They allow us to pressure the Monarch and the initiative at times when that's important. They are all triggering TOR. And this is the interesting thing, is that no matter what your instant and sorcery does, it is always going to be a removal spell. So these token makers are incredibly powerful in this context for helping us play this control game. One of the ways that a control deck like Crackling Drake or Witherbloom Apprentice or TOR WAUKI without these creatures, one of the ways that you die, one of the vulnerabilities as a deck that wants to go late into the game, is dying to random beats because you don't have any bodies to dissuade people. And people will take free pot shots at you because you're just an easy target. And if they know that they can pressure you freely while also accomplishing their other game plan, then they limit the possibility that they lose to you in the late game because the control deck didn't get pressured. So having these bodies in play is enormously important for us to be able to stay alive and to push into that late game, where the value of having Sorin's Thirst attached to attached to 45 out of 100 of our spells in the deck is going to overwhelm our opponents and allow us to win the game. The second thing you're going to see in this creature category is you're going to see pingers. We have Firebrand Archer, we have Kessig Flame Breather, and then we have Thermo Alchemist. And then we have Creeping Bloodsucker. Actually, that's the last one and the newest one. And all of these things are allowing us to deal damage, which is amplified by TOR WAUKI. And the reality is that games tends to end in our favor when we're able to stick and protect one of these pingers that cast off of non-creature or cast off of instant and sorcery while we have TOR WAUKI on the field, because each one of these means that every spell we cast is going to be a Sorin's Thirst paired with 2 damage off of the Archer, the Flame Breather, or the Thermo Alchemist. So the Creeping Bloodsucker comes in this particular case because when we amplify the damage with TOR, it amplifies the life gain because it's the damage dealt this way. So it's another thing to keep in mind. So broadly speaking, we have this category of creatures where we want creatures that are either pinging, where we can amplify that damage, or we're looking for instants and sorceries that make bodies. Okay, so there's that particular category. And we're going to skip over things like discard. We can look at things like a Braid, where obviously a Braid is 4 damage to any creature with TOR out, but it's also destroy target artifact. So this is a card where we can say, instead of playing a black removal spell, we just play a Braid because it's going to deal 5, it's going to deal 4 damage to something with a 2 damage trigger. So we could kill anything up to a Dargo with a Braid, while also having the modal ability to destroy an artifact. So a Braid oftentimes finds its way into decks like this. Control decks in particular want the ability to answer tough to answer permanents like an artifact, and to have that tech on board is really important. We have Tasker's Cruelty and Siphon Mind. We're not going to talk too much about these smaller categories, but Tasker's Cruelty is a 1 mana discard spell that allows us to play that control game. Now, for the draw spells, you're going to see that we play the normal suite of black draw spells, but we have a couple of other things on board that help us draw cards, like Bonder's Ornament and like the newly printed Infernal Idol, as well as Network Terminal, which allows us to loot through our deck. Everything else, though, we are focusing as much as we can on the cheap and the instant speed. Blood Pact is instant speed at 3 mana. Shadow Prophecy is instant speed at 3 mana. Succumb to Temptation, instant speed at 3 mana. The other one's Reckless Impulse is essentially going to be a Night's Whisper or a Sign in Blood for just 1 and a red that doesn't cost us life, but actually gains us life because of TOR. We also do play Village Rites in this, and as well as Deadly Dispute. And the reason for that is that once we went into the tokens, which help keep us alive and pressure our opponents, we also could start playing cards that allow us to sacrifice a creature or an artifact to draw cards. Now, the other thing that these do as well is that they help protect our TOR WAUKI against things like Oubliette, which are a really big problem for a Rakdos deck. So these function dual purpose. They're modal in that they're going to draw us cards, but they're also protection. And when we don't need the protection, we can just sacrifice tokens or rocks or our lands if they're Great Furnace or Vault of Whispers to draw cards. We also play edicts in the deck. This isn't a big section, so we'll just go over this really quickly. Miracle's Edict is essentially going to make everybody sack a creature. Tyrant's Choice is the same thing, except that the alternate mode on Tyrant's Choice is that everybody loses 4 life instead of sacking a creature when they vote. So Tyrant's Choice is nice because early on, it's going to often allow us to politic our way into dealing with a problematic permanent. If the table does not want something in play that is hard to kill, that edicts kill, then Tyrant's Choice, you just look at them and say, hey, vote with me, and then you make them, they all sack a creature, and then you get to accomplish what you want to do. Late game, though, this is always going to be what we vote. And when I say late game, I'm saying like if we're in a 1v1, when we vote for Torture for 4 life, it is always going to be Torture. So it's going to allow us to close the game. But more importantly, it's a mass edict that is on an instant or a sorcery, so it also generates that value with the Sorin's Thirst. We play Debt to the Kami as well, mainly because it's an instant speed edict that also can unlock us from a Oubliette. It can destroy Pestilence too, so there's good value there. One of the other things you'll see here too, and this is getting into why we can play these tech cards, is because any spell that is an instant or a sorcery is also removal. So one of the cards that we recently added is Fog. In this meta with a lot of combat damage, with even some powerful Voltron commanders like Sailor's Bane, even powerful commanders that can make really big threats like Satyr Enchanter. Darkness is really, really crucial. And at the very minimum, you can just cast Darkness to get a Sorin's Thirst. So an instant speed, Fog is really powerful here. So other versions of tech that we have in this deck are Pyroblast. You'll see that we don't have Red Elemental Blast here, and that's because you don't always have a blue deck in the pod, and because Red Elemental Blast can't target anything. It must target a blue permanent or a blue spell, or you can't cast it. Pyroblast, you can target anything, and then the spell, when it resolves, it checks to see, is it blue or is it a blue permanent? Blue permanent, blue spell, and then if it's not, you still get the cast trigger for TOR, which means that we can cast the spell at any time, targeting anything, and we're going to get TOR's trigger. And that Pyroblast countering blue spells does come in handy. It's very efficient. Rancid Earth is another example of the kind of spells that you can look into, and it's almost better to look at these as a category. Fog, Rancid Earth, the Debt to the Kami, Pyroblast, a Braid. These are all spells that have a secondary mode on them. Even Rotten Reunion is chosen for this deck because it is an instant speed graveyard hate that has 2 casts on it, and it is modality. The modality of it is that it creates a body that can eat an edict. So if we have Tor in play and somebody casts Fleshbag Marauder, we can go Rotten Reunion, make a 2/2, sack the 2/2 instead, which is really, really powerful. So, and I see we have a couple of questions in chat. I'm going to get to those at the end of this, which is coming up here shortly. And then we'll kind of talk about the format as a whole for those of you who have that question, and also the decks. If you have questions about the deck, how it's played, things like that, then that'll all be added into the video. So thanks for your patience. We've got the pingers here. We've already gone over that. The protection suite's the next one. This is looking into the cheapest, most efficient ways we can, and most repetitive ways that we can protect TOR WAUKI. And the beauty of these protection spells is that they're all just removal. If we have TOR in play, we're not only protecting our commander with this spell, but we're also getting a TOR WAUKI trigger. These spells are also really good to, because we have a ton of them, to be used on our pingers. So we can early on deploy a pinger, have one of these things up, and protect our commander. Or we can protect our pingers, depending on what we want to do. But the main thing is that none of the spells in our deck are dead at any time of the game. Even many of our mana rocks, we can play them down, and we can sacrifice them to draw cards, or we can play them down and we can make a body, like with Fountain of Ichor or Guardian Idol, or they're all going to produce some form of value. So you're going to see we chose all of the cheapest ways to protect TOR WAUKI. We have Armor of Shadows, Feign Death, Professor's Warning, Supernatural Stamina, and Undying Evil, and Undying Malice as well. And these are all 1-mana ways to protect something that we care about. They also bring it back with a counter, which many of them do, which is really important because it allows TOR to stay out through some of the sweeper effects, and we'll talk about those in a moment. Some of the spicy picks that I've been really enjoying here are Wail of the Nim, which is another one of these tech pieces where it is both protection, regenerate each creature you control for 3 mana at instant speed, or it is 1 mana dealt to, 1 damage dealt to each player and each creature, or both. And so these cards are really high value, similar to Rancid Earth, as I was pointing out before, where the threshold on that, it deals 1 damage to each player and each creature, which is 2 damage with TOR. So what this means is that Rancid Earth, Wail of the Nim, there's a couple of other ones that you'll see in a moment here, are basically Fiery Cannonade that gains us life while also having a relevant effect. Destroying a land is really important in this format because of decks like Gretchen, which load up a single land with a bunch of auras. So having the ability to destroy an Opal Palace or a Study Hall or even a Mystic Sanctuary, or just a land that like a Karoo land that people have put multiple auras on, is really a nice tech. So you'll also see we have more permanent things like Blessing of Leeches, which allows us to regenerate our creature over and over and over again at a small cost of life, and then Whisper Silk Cloak. The idea being that these are going to lock down our commander in a way that it becomes very hard to kill it and keep it off the board. Because if we resolve a Whisper Silk Cloak with our TOR WAUKI, we are going to do some really heinous things to the board. We have a really nice ramp package here. This is one area where you may choose to play more of it than what I have chosen. And I may end up playing more in the future because this is a 5-mana commander that we need to recast because it is very threatening and people will try to kill it. So I think as much as 12 or even 14 ramp rocks would be appropriate in a deck like this. Now, the removal suite, you're going to see that most of the stuff here is going to be highly efficient. It's going to be 1 mana deal, and it's going to be damage focused. Now, it's important with TOR WAUKI when you're constructing this deck to walk a fine line between the spells that have synergy with TOR WAUKI and the spells that just work. So we need to balance essentially Terminate and Lightning Bolt. Okay. Lightning Bolt has this added synergy of dealing 4 damage. Galvanic Blast deals 5. Abrade deals 4. Thunderclap deals 4. Scred deals lots. And these are really, really good. But when TOR WAUKI is out, they're just a little bit less good. And so what we need to make sure is that our deck still functions without TOR WAUKI in play. If we need to kill a Dargo, and normally we would be able to kill a Dargo with our Lightning Bolt, but we can't because we don't have TOR WAUKI in play, that's where cards like Terminate, Go for the Throat, Feed the Swarm, Snuff Out, even Defile to a degree, Spinning Darkness, that's where these things come in. They're just less conditional, and they're always going to do the job. You could also play cards like Victim of Night or Grasp of Darkness in those slots. But you want to basically balance between the high roll of having TOR out and just going absolutely apeshit with damage spells that are all amplified, and then just having some generically good things that kill things. But you see, we play all three of the free spells. We play Snuff Out, Spinning Darkness, where you exile the top 3 black cards of your library, and this is a Lightning Helix. It's 3 damage to target creature, a non-black creature, and then you gain 3 life. And then Thunderclap, sack a mountain, deal 3 to something. Now the sweepers is where this gets really interesting. We do play Fiery Cannonade and Breath Weapon, even though these cards will kill TOR. So if we cast a Breath Weapon, it deals 2 damage plus 1 to everything. Same with Fiery Cannonade. So these are in here to hedge for the times when we don't have TOR or when things go wrong. And that is okay, because in a control deck, you really do need to have an off switch. And these are great off switches. When TOR isn't in play early on, we can sweep the board up, clean up a bunch of like scary, gut and token type stuff. And then when TOR comes down, then we can just hold these until maybe TOR dies and we need to wipe the board. So say somebody goes to kill it, we don't have a protection spell, we want to reset the board, we cast the Fiery Cannonade with that removal spell in the stack, and then we're able to end that threat. But we also have Electrickery, which is 1 damage to 1 target that you don't control, which is going to have that trigger. So it's going to deal a total of 4 damage if TOR remains on the field when this resolves to a target. But it's the overload that's so good. 2 damage to each creature that you don't control at instant speed. And there's a lot of these effects, and you'll notice that there are some of them that I don't play. You're probably thinking End the Festivities. There's even Smash to Dust, which is destroy target artifact, destroy target creature with Defender, or deal 1 damage to each creature your opponent controls. It's modal and it's 2 mana. I prioritized here the Electrickery because it's instant speed. Now you'll see there's certain places where I fudged that, like Fang Dragon. I chose to play this one over the artifact destruction spell Smash because I have a Braid for that. And Fang Dragon is a card that later on in the game is just a 6/3 flyer. I mean, this is just it says it's going to sweep the board, but it also says late game, I just play this 6/3 when everybody's gassed out. And that's really, really powerful in this format. You'll also see we have Rancid Earth, which destroys a land. And then if we have Threshold, we're going to deal 1 damage to each creature and each player, which is great. Whale of the Nimweirder talked about. And then the GOAT, Pestilence. Pestilence is so broken in this deck. It amplifies all the damage we deal. So it's 2 damage to each creature, 2 damage to each player. That does mean that we, generally speaking, will only activate Pestilence for 1 every turn so that we don't kill our TOR WAUKI. But it's just very efficient in this particular deck to be able to go 5 mana, Pestilence activate for 1, hit everything for 2. You'll see we have a nice fat 36 lands. And that is because we really just want to be able to cast and recast our commander over and over again. So now let's go into the considering section because there's so many different cards you could play for this deck. There's cards in the token generating sphere. We have cards like Moan of the Unhallowed, which I recently cut for Hordling Outburst, just because Hordling Outburst is that much more efficient. But you could play Moan of the Unhallowed in that same slot and just have the 1/1s. There's also the Monarch cards like Thorn or Vicious Battle Rager and the Initiative cards. These are all options as well. I chose not to play them because ultimately they're not generating a trigger for TOR. They kind of come at a tension with like the other slots in our deck. If we want to have enough draw spells, if we want to have enough ramp and enough removal, these are the cards that are hard to play. There's a lot of other really good cards you can play in here. I think the most notable ones are the pingers, something like Impact Tremors, where every time we're playing a creature, we're dealing 2 damage to each opponent, which is obviously quite powerful. Coffin Purge is another good example of that, where we're getting 2 spells on 1. You can kind of look at Coffin Purge as 2 black, deal 2 damage to 2 different targets, and gain 4 life, which is like Boros Charm. It's like better than Boros Charm in this deck, while exiling cards from the graveyard. So this is a good one. Again, it's not a card that ended up making its way into the deck because the slots are so precious in this particular context. We also have Battle Rage Blessing, which is modal in the sense that it is both a protection spell granting indestructibility while also granting TOR Death Touch. Now, the problem with this and the reason it didn't make the cut was because the death touch is only after the trigger resolves. So we're not giving Tor death touch and then having him pings things, which would turn this into a kill spell, like a 2-mana death touching thing. However, every spell that we cast after with the death touch would indeed kill things with it. The other things we're going to see in here too is all of these cheap 1-mana spells that are all really efficient and good. We've got cards like Reb, we've got Vendetta, we've got Flame Slash, and while I assure you these are all really great spells, there's just a real tightness to the deck that we need to adhere to when we're playing this. So, and then the last thing I want to talk about is the sweepers. There's great efficient spells that we can do here, and the trouble is that if we play too many of them, we're going to oftentimes find ourselves in the case where TOR WAUKI isn't out, or we can't cast TOR WAUKI, and these spells don't do anything. 1 damage to the board is really not good enough most of the time. It needs to be 2 damage, Fiery Cannonade, for it to be good, which is where, you know, Blazing Volley and particularly End the Festivities are really good when Tor is out, but they kind of don't do anything when Tor isn't. So the next one that I would be looking at was something like Boiling Earth, which is kind of competing for that slot with Fang Dragon, where Boiling Earth is, at the time of casting, is going to be 2 damage to each, or 1 damage to each opponent, your creature your opponent controls, or 2 with Tor. And then we can also pay 7 to make our land into a 4/4, which is essentially turning our spells into both removal and a body. So if you imagine that the value of that is enormous. We're saying you lose a creature, I gain a creature, and I'm while I kill a lot of creatures, because it's not just Boiling Earth, but it's like all of these 1 damage spells become 2 damage, and then they've got a 2 damage trigger on them. So with Tor in play, and the Festivities is kill a Mirror Enforcer while dealing 2 damage to everything else and 2 damage to you. So lots of good potential there, but it's just a matter of picking and choosing between these. So if you want to come back through later and figure out which ones you prefer, totally reasonable to do. And there's a lot of opportunity for adjustment given different metas. So that is TOR WAUKI.